Um, I think the thing that's very interesting is, and we're here to talk about race. Seems to be the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about. And obviously the New York Magazine decided that they wanted to talk about that particular issue, and they had 4 interesting articles that were out there. And the first one I want to talk about is dealing with the idea of race. And Dr. Taylor, I want to bring you in here kind of first, because I think that when we talk about race in politics, we also have to look at the changing demographics of politics.
Absolutely. And the U.S. Census just projected, and it's not new news, it's old news. In fact, it's about 5 years old, but for some reason, the media, I guess the AP put it out, but it's projected that whites will be a minority in about 35 years from now, and I hope I live to see this, to see what it's like. You know, that fact, the fact that whites will be a minority, that blacks will increase by about 3%, from 12% to 15%. The Latino and the Asian populations will go from 5% to 9%. The Latino population will become a large plurality, is going to fundamentally shift the way in which race is constructed, and the way in which I'm hearing in the mainstream media it being interpreted is being interpreted as if race will become insignificant. And I argue just the opposite. I think race becomes more critically actionable as opposed to being less important. It sort of suggests that if whites are not in power, then racism will cease to be a relevant social construct. I fundamentally believe that race is the result of society being constructed a certain way. Many of us have been educated in the last 20 years to, sort of parrot and regurgitate the same old sort of post-structuralist, post-modernist language that somehow we're going to this new place where race will be less important because it's a social construction, and if we just fix the social constructions, we can fix our problems. I argue that society itself is racially constructed, and as a result, you got to get down to the root like a dentist in order to fix the problem that is causing the pain in society, and I don't know if we have the will to do that.
Okay, so obviously when we look at the political future, if Barack, quote unquote, for some reason doesn't win, down the road it looks like there might be a chance for someone else of color to be elected. But right now we're dealing with the reality that Barack is running, and race seems to be out there. Or is it? Is race really out there? Are we really having an honest discussion about race? I think that...
I don't know how honest it is, but it's definitely a salient issue, absolutely. And the terms on which it's been sort of discussed, I mean, even Keith Olbermann, for example, on MSNBC, is one of the most left-wing, radical, outspoken critics of the Bush administration, of conservatism generally. But a study was done that showed recently that he is out of, even compared to Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity and Combs, that Keith Olbermann, the good white liberal, has had way less women and way less African Americans on his show doing commentary than has Bill O'Reilly, of all people. And so the way in which I think we're sort of talking about race is on white people's terms, in white people's languages, and in white people's understanding of the way in which race shall be sort of discussed and deliberated. We thank God for your program and similar kinds of programs, that we're having and access to the internet, of being able to sort of expand our voices. But truth be told, in the mainstream, the conversation is not reciprocal. It's a one-way conversation, and white folk are telling us that we have reached a post-racial reality because they are in the mood to vote for a half-black man. And that to me is problematic, because to me, and I've written an article recently on NPR, and I made the point that voting for Barack Obama is the cheapest way that white folk can try to move us forward towards some kind of racial, brotherhood or sisterhood. That voting for Barack Obama doesn't require a whole lot of real work. It doesn't require, as you all were talking very passionately about education, about the system, and about how things are all sort of convoluted in what our children are learning. That is the hard work. Fixing the ghettos, housing is the hard work. Healthcare, that's the hard work. It's easy to go into a booth and vote for Barack Obama and then walk out and say, oh, ding dong, the witch is dead. We are now in this new world order where race is no longer relevant, and yet we know that just 2 years ago, black bodies were floating down in the streets while this whole country sat by voyeuristically and watched us die. I will never forget Hurricane Katrina and somehow let Barack Obama's inauguration or election be a means to peace when those same black folk are still in Utah and in Arizona and all over the country away from their homes in the 9th Ward of Louisiana.
Let's let somebody respond to what the statements you made.
Oh,
That was a handful.
Yeah, that's something else. Well, I will say this. I do agree with the brother that Barack Obama, voting for Barack Obama absolutely does not end racism. It does not all of a sudden, we can't wave the magic wand and say that now we have a black president, that we have achieved uniformity and the perfect union. I wish that we all could work, as Barack Obama says himself, work towards that perfect union. We haven't achieved it yet. As a lot of this country, and how much I do love this country, as much, but we are trying to, with its imperfections, we've had them. But I do feel as if it has brought into the light a lot of things that, it's just talking about it, the dialogues, even the CNN.
But have we really talked about it though?
Well, even the CNN, with as much controversy as it had, a lot of people didn't like the CNN special. I actually liked
Blacks
it.
in America.
But it was a step. It wasn't it could have been stronger, could have been a little bit more forceful, absolutely. But it was a step. The same way as we had, blackface back in. Nobody liked them. Obviously it was very degrading, but it was a step that years later down the line led to a lot of African Americans who were able to be on television.
So the magazine article was for people to know, was called the Color Coded Campaign, and it was talking about some of these things that are out there. And they asked the question: do we really want to know the answer, Dante? Do we really want to know the answer about race and politics?
I don't think so. I think most of us, and I'll speak more specific to, if you would poll most white Americans, they don't believe that racism still exists. But when you speak to African Americans, and I'm an African American male, and I believe that we sort of deal with racism more head on than most people, if you will, we look at things from a different dynamic. And I think that's why the Black in America was so troubling for a lot of people, because it was about us. It was about who we are as a people. And I think that this country doesn't like to deal with that past, and because it's still going on right now. The issue is, where we're really fronted with now, is how are we going to attack it? And for me, the reality is, I don't really think that racism will ever eradicate itself. I really don't think that we can really completely wipe it out. I think we can make some steps towards dealing with it, but I don't think we can wipe it out.
Now, the thing I was wondering to myself, Lloyd, didn't we get the answer about race and politics once we saw the Pennsylvania and Virginia primaries, when we saw what happened there? Didn't we get an answer to the question?
You mean when the tides turned? Well, what I find is interesting is that we're always talking about being, let's not just talk about race, let's talk about being of African American descent, or African descent. I think it's interesting that it's always talked about almost as if it's a negative. Like, why shouldn't we want to talk about Obama being a black man? Or why should we talk about Michelle Obama being a nice, well-dressed black woman, as if it's a strange thing to happen? So when people say that we shouldn't even inject, the phrase that Obama's a black man, and I don't agree with that, unless you think that there's something wrong with being a black man.